Welcome to the Foothills, a Colorado lifestyle and real estate podcast featuring mountain home real estate broker Robert Martin, who has over 25 years of experience assisting clients reach their goals and move forward. Tune in each week for a dynamic conversation with experts, Colorado adventurers, and residents that explores the ins, outs, and specific nuances of buying the perfect mountain home or selling your dream home in Evergreen, Conifer, Bailey, and surrounding areas to catch a glimpse into the Colorado lifestyle that's a part of you.
Today I'll be visiting with Andrew Skurka. Andrew lives in Boulder and as a 20-something was a prolific long-distance thru-hiker and was named Adventurer of the Year by Outside and National Geographic, as well as Person of the Year by Backpacker. Andrew helped to define modern light and fast backcountry travel, and his definitive book, The Ultimate Hiker's Gear Guide, Tools and Tips to Hit the Trail, was published by National Geographic and has sold over 125,000 copies. Each year, he manages about 20 learning-intensive backpacking trips, which he leads with the help of a dozen other world-class guides. Andrew, welcome, and thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Tell me a little bit about yourself and your background.
So I'm 40, almost 41 years old, live in Boulder, have an outdoor company that primarily does a lot of guided backpacking trips, but I also keep an active website with a bunch of blog content, and I've also written a book that was published by National Geographic.
Yes, which we'll talk about shortly. It's a great book. Early in your career, Andrew, you were described as a Superman among trekkers and one of the best traveled and fastest hikers on the planet. What inspired you to become a long-distance thru-hiker back then?
You know, it's funny, when I was describing myself, I noticed that I completely left out everything that I had done in my 20s.
It's your whole life.
So my 20s, I was like this dirtbag thru-hiker, and I would every year would spend 6 months, 9 months, 11 months walking. So I did after I graduated college, I did an 11-month trip from Quebec to Washington State. Then in 2007, I did a 6,800-mile trip around the American West. And then in 2010, when I was 29, I did a 6-month-long loop around Alaska-Yukon.
And what was it? Why did you decide to step out and do those things?
I just loved being out there. I loved exploring areas that I hadn't been to before, and frankly, I haven't been back. A lot of them I haven't been back to since. I was taking advantage of a period of my life where I had all the adult making, or the decision making abilities of an adult. I was on my own, but I didn't have any of the responsibilities that come with age, like a mortgage or a career or a spouse or a fur child or anything like that. So as far as I was concerned, in that decade, there was not really a better place for me to be than out on the trail.
Do you have a desire? I know you mentioned that you haven't been back to some of those places, and I know your career has evolved into where you do you lead a lot of guided trips now and do a lot of educating. But do you feel pretty comfortable with that now, or is something in the back of your mind that you just maybe want to go revisit some of those treks?
It's an itch for sure. I think maybe it's a cop-out, but I'm justifying this current stage of my life in this idea of chapters that, in my 20s, I was the dirtbag thru-hiker. In my 30s, I was the sort of budding small business owner. I don't know what my 40s will be yet. I just started them. But, there was one of my mentors years ago, he said this line. He had this great line. He said, when I look back at my life, I want to be able to convince myself that overall my life was average. but at no point does this guy live a life that is average. But his point was that if you're always kind of on the extremes, you can, at the end of the day, you're average. Yeah.
Your perspective on average, at least from other people and yourself, is quite different.
So my 20s, I was, young and footloose and free. And now I'm doing the very conventional thing and even home shopping again right now. So, but it's good. Yeah.
So Andrew, when you were named Adventurer of the Year by Outside and National Geographic and Person of the Year by Backpacker, how did that change things for you? Because I know you started out and it was just something you wanted to do. It was fun and you really enjoyed and had, being in the outdoors and doing that. But how did that change your career and your perspective on things moving forward?
So the accolades didn't change the motivation because the trips it's just too hard to spend so many months out there under relatively uncomfortable conditions to be able to justify that effort on like some prospect of fame or fortune. So it didn't change the motivation. I think what it did do though is that it set me up a little bit more for some it just gave me some credibility that allowed me to launch a career. In my 20s, this like the hiking thing was always this, call it a sustainable lifestyle, where I was making enough to make ends meet. And I hadn't really matured as far as like an adult like much since graduating college. So like I was still living like a college kid, and I could fit all my possessions in my car, and I could, my living expense was like $400 a month, and I could eat, beans and rice every day, all day. So I didn't really need much to get by either. But then at some point, it's kind of like being a ski bum or something. Eventually, that lifestyle kind of hits an expiration date, and you just realize that you need to be an adult now.
Yeah, life transitions. We all change, and sometimes it'd be nice to have $400 a month expenses and
Oh man,
just eat,
wouldn't it?
just eat a little bit. That wouldn't be bad. How did you help define modern light and fast backcountry travel through your experiences, and how did that evolve?
Yeah, so the style thing was interesting. When I first started backpacking, so this is 2002, so this is 20 years ago. All of the gear was kind of mountaineering inspired, and mountaineering and like almost like old school like military Boy Scout type stuff. And backpacking was perceived as this, generally speaking, was perceived as this like rest and relaxation or like leisure activity. But the emphasis was more on camping. So like you go out there and you camp. And that was sort of the backpacking trip, because the gear was just so heavy, and there was no emphasis on like minimizing the stuff that you were carrying. So that was 2002. And I remember when I was on the Appalachian Trail that year, there was this like rumor was like spreading up and down the trail that there were these two guys with Go-Lite backpacks. And like everyone had heard of Go-Lite because they were like revolutionizing backpacking, but no one had actually like seen a Go-Lite backpack yet. So I remember meeting these two guys. They called their trail names were the Trees, because they were really tall and lanky, and they had Go-Lite packs. It's like, wow, cool. These things only weighed like a pound and a half. Meanwhile, my Mountain Smith Frostfire 4500 weighs 7.5 pounds empty.
Mm-hmm.
That was like at the beginning, and then so I kind of over the next couple of years figured out how to really trim down my pack, and that coincided with sort of an industry-wide change too, with companies embracing lighter weight equipment, with this growth of the cottage industries, got guys sewing backpacks over the garages type of thing. Also the internet retail, so products that weren't necessarily viable at REI at the time could be viable if you sell them over the internet.
What you did, Andrew, then, so that evolved into your experiences, learning about the lightweight, and then you've obviously had some experience with the Sierra Designs, designing a backpack for them and doing other things. And then your book, obviously, you put a lot of that in very great detail. Tell us about your book, The Ultimate Hiker's Guide.
Yeah, The Ultimate Hiker's Gear Guide is published by National Geographic. The second edition came out in 2017. So I think it's still doing pretty well as far as its relevance. The book is primarily about gear selection. So it lays out some parameters at the start. And one of the arguments is that there actually is a right way to backpack, and that right way is to have the gear, supplies, and skills that are appropriate for your trip objectives and for the conditions. So it starts off with this discussion of trip objectives. With backpacking, you can kind of break it down with like how much camping you want to do versus how much hiking. And then depending on where you are along that spectrum, you're going to kind of put a relative value on either comfort or weight. So if you're going to be like a thru-hiker and you're going to want to do a trail relatively quickly, you're going to want to be comfortable on the trail. You're going to want to pack pretty light. If you're going out for a relaxing weekend with your friends and you're not going to hike in very far and not going to hike in very long, then you can bring more comforts. You don't want to go crazy, but it would be disappointing to be base camped on a Saturday or a Sunday or something and not, for example, have a Kindle. Like, why wouldn't you do that?
Have your bottle of wine.
Sure. Yeah. Or whiskey. Yeah, sure. Totally.
Whatever. Yeah.
Yep. So that's kind of, those are the objectives. And then the conditions, I think this is where it almost seems like it's completely logical, but it was sort of like lost in the conversation until I started harping on it. Rather than justifying a lot of your gear decisions on the basis of like, well, what if, or just in case, or sort of your vague understanding of what the conditions might be like with where you're going, like you can actually do some homework really easily and find out what the likely conditions are. So you can look at likely temperatures and precipitation. You can look at tree cover or shade. You can look at water availability, problematic wildlife, biting insects. So there are all these things that you can look at, and then you're like, it's basically, those are your inputs, and your outputs are the gear that you take. So if you, like in Colorado, if you were planning a trip in July and you did some homework, you'd be like, oh, hey, yeah, it's like really sunny most of the morning, and then like we have a good chance of getting hit with an afternoon monsoon. Like that's what my research showed me. So I'm going to wear a long sleeve shirt to protect my arms from the sun, and I'm definitely going to have like full coverage rain gear available.
So planning and being really specific, like you said, if you have a, specific place you want to go, and there, we're not living in the Stone Ages. We can get online and do
Easy.
Research, and you have some wonderful templates or just guides on how to do that. And I know you have courses also that you lay out to do exactly what you described. If you're going to if you want to do a trip, if you want to do a through hike of the Colorado Trail, what best, how would you want to plan that? When would you want to go? What gear would you want to take? That sort of thing.
Yeah, I think, I'm a pretty methodical, deliberate, intentional person. And I think that approach works really well for backpacking. I mean, don't get me wrong, like you can wing it and make it happen, but like you're probably going to enjoy yourself more, and you're definitely going to be a lot safer if you do a little bit of homework beforehand.
Plus, it just makes you feel more comfortable, gives you a lot of confidence out there, and you can enjoy it more. And more recently, you focus on the high routes and the long distance running. You pioneered 4 off-trail backpacking routes, created guidebooks for each of them. And each year you manage about 20 learning intensive backpacking trips, which you lead with the help of a dozen other world-class guides, wonderful people. Tell us about those.
So the high routes it's funny, we were talking about, you asked earlier if I still have like a desire to get back to some of these places, and not the high routes for me were kind of a solution for having adventurous and unique experiences, but doing that in a way that was compatible with my life at the time, and like still is. So the high routes are like much shorter, much more intense backpacking itineraries, and they usually follow some geographic feature. So for example, like in the Front Range of Colorado here, there's a route called the Fifth Traverse. It goes from Milner Pass to Berthoud Pass. There's a route up in the Wind River Range that follows the Continental Divide through the range. There are routes in Sequoia Kings Canyon National Park in California, and also Yosemite. And all these routes they're relatively short. The Fifth Traverse is 75 miles. The Kings Canyon High Basin route is 125. Wind River route is like not quite 100. So these aren't long by standards of like even the Colorado Trail, but you can do it in like a week and a half, maybe even a little bit less. That's a period of time that can fit into a normal vacation, as opposed to like, having to take a pretty big break from life.
You're right. It's tough to find that kind of time, when you're busy and doing things. So on that trip, Andrew, an old fart like me, I did it a couple of years ago with you guys at the Kings Canyon Sequoia National Park. It was a great experience. I learned a lot. There was some learning intensive things we did with, backcountry navigation and just learning, stuff about gear and things like that. So on the trips, they also have the opportunity to, with your guides, give them some great information, each day as you go.
Yeah, the trips that we run, try really hard to make them sort of learning intensive. I didn't want to just do backcountry tours and just drag people around the backcountry. It was something like I wanted people to be able to go home and say, "Hey, I learned a ton on this trip with Andrew and his crew, and I could actually do something comparable on my own." That seems like a business model that I can sleep better about at night.
Well, that's a great one, and I certainly feel that way. I mean, really wasn't that active outside, and did some things with my kids and scouts, and we did a few backpacking trips, went to Philmont a couple times, and I still have a desire to do the Colorado Trail, but I let work get in the way, and
It's right in your backyard.
It's
You're
right
so
in my backyard.
close.
Just a hop, skip, and a jump. Yeah, it's only a few miles away.
Yeah.
So, but that's something I got, in my bucket list, I guess, to do in the future here. So shifting gears just a bit, what was being in the Boston Marathon like?
Oh, Boston is such a good race. I'm actually running again this April.
Okay.
I'd say I've run some very cool races in my life, but Boston just kind of is just next level. It's a world major marathon. There are only 6 or 7 of them, and they host it. There's not a pandemic going on. They host it on Patriots Day, which is a holiday that only Massachusetts celebrates, and the entire state has the day off. And so people from all over come out to see the race because there's always an elite field, and everyone knows someone who's in it because it's a huge field too. It's like 30, 40, 50,000 people depending on the year. And some of the early miles are a little quiet, but you start getting a little closer to the city, and it is basically like you never go more than 100 yards without someone cheering you on. Wow. And then when you pull into downtown, I mean, you're talking like a large sidewalk on both sides of the street, completely full of people just yelling their heads off at you. It is unbelievable. Like the last mile and a half, 2 miles are just something else. I remember this one period this was probably like about a mile from the finish, and I turned this corner, and maybe onto Beacon Street or Dorchester, I can't remember the name, and or Boylston, and the crowd just went crazy, and I like raised my hands and like raised my fists, and like I swear like they got louder, which is like I was only in I finished pretty well at Boston. I was like, so what was I, like 74th or something? Wow, but like I'm not winning the race or anything, so I was just like some very normal guy. The winners had come through 25 minutes earlier, so it's a very cool race.
Yeah, what a wonderful feeling that is. And you do it for the reasons that you do it. You like it, and it's, you're not trying to win it. You want to do as well as you can. But I'm sure that feels good to just feel that energy. All the people. It sounds like a wonderful event. The whole community
totally
comes together.
Boston, it's like the race. I don't know, at least the way that I approach races, like the race is there's so much that goes into that race. Like I've been training for Boston since October, so I'm entering my 5th month of training here. And running right now, we're running 75 miles a week, 2 or 3 workouts a week. Most mornings out the door at 7:15. Doesn't matter the conditions. Like when we were out, it was really cold. Was that last week or the week before? Like we were doing a workout at 7:15 in the morning when it was like 4 degrees. So by the time you get to the race, it's almost kind of just icing on the cake.
Do you feel, Andrew, that training at elevation, does that help, or is that a bit of a misnomer?
I think it's a little bit of a misnomer. So at least for the marathon, because what happens in the marathon is you're running right at threshold. So you're right on the cusp of like being anaerobic, and you can run for a really long time if you are below your threshold. But if you are, once you get above it, you have kind of the timer goes on. The timer gets turned on, and you only have so much time that you can run above your threshold because you're anaerobic. So when you're at altitude, your threshold is lower because you don't have as much oxygen in the air. So you're not able to run at race pace the same for as long as you would be able to at sea level. So it gets difficult because like when I go to Boston, like a lot of our workouts here, like I'm going to go out this weekend, I've got a long run with some efforts at marathon pace, and I'll be able to average, like 5:45, 5:50. But during the race, I want to be at like 5:35, 5:40. So when the body, it doesn't sound like that much for the ask the body to run 10 seconds per mile faster, but it actually can, like, it's a strange stress on the body as far as mine is concerned, because it's not used to that running that fast.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, how does that translate that into your ultra trail running competitions that you've done in the past? I mean, not running at elevation then, or not running, running at a higher elevation than a racing, and it's so much different. All the ups and downs and the weather and the.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the ultra scene is a little different. You can actually train, like, I think you can train really well for ultras living here in Colorado, just because you have access to big vertical. You'll be well acclimatized for any of the high altitude races. If you were to enter something like Leadville or Hard Rock, good luck getting in, but at least it's difficult to, like, if you live in Seattle, like, how would you come out and run San Juan Solstice?
So if you turn it around, you're in an advantage then, training here for those types
for
of races.
sure. Yeah.
And what would those be, Andrew? Some of those you mentioned, the Leadville 100, a few others that you've run in over the years.
So in Colorado, I mean, the big ones would be Hard Rock is probably the most renowned. It's one of the oldest. It's down in the San Juans, down the southwestern part of the state. It's also down there is San Juan Solstice, which is a 50-miler, kind of similar country. And then Leadville 100, it's an old race, pretty big field, has a very storied past. It's changed a lot, but it's still a reputable race. And then Run Rabbit Run up in Steamboat, another big 100. Then there are a bunch of smaller races, or smaller or shorter. So there's like the Power of Four out in Aspen, and there's the what is it? It's not the Grand Traverse. That's a ski race. There's like a stage race out kind of like in that Crested Butte area.
Which you enjoy those more than?
With my schedule, I find that it's like the marathon is the way to go for me, because I can train consistently all winter. Whereas once the guiding season starts, it's difficult for me to put in consistent training. And I may not even be available. Like, my training buddy is running Hard Rock this year, and I'm not going to be even in the state to help him out. So yeah, be up in Alaska at that time.
Yeah. I wish you the best at Boston. That'll be interesting to see how you do, and sounds like a great experience. Just a couple more questions, Andrew. So if someone is considering a mountain home, you spend a lot of time considering buying a mountain home. You spend a lot of time in the foothills and in the mountains, and you have a great understanding for the backcountry and wildlife, fire mitigation, that sort of thing. What types of things, or what would you possibly, if you could give them a word of advice, what might you say to them?
Well, if they're not from around here, the fire thing is, it's just really has caught my attention in the last couple of years. So we just seem to have reached a new normal with wildfires in the West. I've had in 2020 and 2021, like, were the worst fire seasons for my guiding program ever. I mean, we had to reschedule or cancel multiple trips because of fires. And then other trips were just like completely smoked out because of fires. And the forests are, even if we get like a normal winter, the forest seems like it's in kind of a constant state of drought because lack of either summertime moisture or repeated drought, like years of drought previously. Like, one normal winter doesn't necessarily just restore everything back to normal. The summers tend to be really hot and dry, or hotter and drier now. So I would say just be really attentive to that fire thing. And I've been really amazed is a tough word, because maybe in awe of, I'd say that's probably fair. Like, I'm in awe of how quickly some of these fires have moved in recent years. So like the East Troublesome fire, when you look at how quickly that moved, driven by wind and by lots of dry fuel, it's pretty terrifying. And you look at some of the size of the fires, either here in the state of Colorado or like out in California, which I think California is probably ahead of where Colorado is, but I think Colorado is probably going in the same direction. like it's pretty normal to have a fire in California that's 1 million acres now. Like that's just like unfathomably large. And then we've been seem to have these fires in places that you just wouldn't expect fires, like this Marshall Fire back at the end of December. I think probably unprecedented in the history of Colorado, at least from like white man perspectives, like 1850 to now, to have a fire like that at the end of December.
Yeah, it's so hard to believe it. It started as mostly just a ground,
Yep. You're right. Out of prairie fire. Yeah.
Prairie fire. Yeah. And who would have thought, I really feel for everyone there, that a platted subdivision, burn like that. We see it, with the wildfires and with the forests and that sort of thing. Yeah. Extraordinary.
Yeah.
So that's a great point, Andrew.
Yeah. Where I live in Boulder, so I'm on the east side of 36, and I started thinking about Boulder's sort of wildfire vulnerabilities when we had the fires up on Bear Peak back in 2011, 2012. And I was thinking like, oh, it would take a lot for a fire to come down out of the foothills, through the prairie grass to hit the residential areas and start burning east. But then when I watched East Troublesome Fire and when I watched Marshall Fire, like no problem. No problem. Yeah. It's actually shocking that more homes didn't burn in Louisville and Superior, given how strong the winds were that day and given how dry everything was.
I guess we got there's some with the weather changing that possibly, made the wind speeds and different things later in the evening.
Yeah, who knows?
And that's something that is part of a purchase contract that buyers have the opportunity to have their property inspected. Insurance companies have the opportunity to come out, look at a property. They look for fire mitigation. Depends upon where you're at and, your proximity to the forest or your neighbors and how your home's built, what kind of materials your home's built with, that sort of thing. And so that's something that buyers should look at very seriously. And it's a really good point as far as purchasing a home, especially, well, anywhere really, as part of the purchase contract. So, Andrew, what's your favorite thing about living in Colorado? And we'll get you wrapped up and you can move on here.
Favorite thing about living in Colorado. I think that Colorado is great for done in a day type of activities. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have the wilderness of Montana or Wyoming or Idaho, but it's because of both its topography and its mining history. There are kind of roads going everywhere and services everywhere, and it just lends itself to a lot of like high quality weekend or day activities.
And there's so many close by. The open space parks, everything's within 30 minutes to an hour.
Yeah. So of course, that is also as a curse too, because there are a lot of people here and those areas get pretty crowded. But the reality is that a lot of us have to work Monday to Friday. So,
and like you said, if you are going out, it's always good to have a plan, to know where you're going, what you're planning on doing, and trying to, just spend some time online and get some information about, okay, what kind of gears do I take? What does the weather look like? Even if it's a short 2-hour hike and you're just planning on going somewhere, close by. So a little planning, looking ahead is always a good thought process.
I would agree.
So Andrew, the best place to reach you if people want to reach out and get more information is your website.
Yeah, that would be the best spot. And if readers, if they're not seeing like my last name on the on your podcast, the last name is Skurka, Skurka. So if they were to search for Andrew Skurka, they would definitely pull me up.
Thanks. That's great, Andrew. And I really appreciate you jumping on the call today and taking time to give us some wonderful information.
Absolutely, Robert. My pleasure.
All right. Have a great day now. To the Foothills, a Colorado lifestyle and real estate podcast. On the podcast, I interview real estate experts, Colorado adventurers, and residents who enjoy the serenity and lifestyle of living in our mountain communities. Tune in each week for a conversation that explores the ins and outs of buying the perfect mountain home or selling your dream home, and catch a glimpse into the Colorado lifestyle that's a part of you.